Hi everyone, it's Rev Kimmy. Thank you so much for joining us.
And I'm Dr. G, and this is Season 2, Episode 5, Orrin and Orson West, Tipster Behind the Scenes. And this episode was recorded post-trial and post-verdict. Well, Kimmy, this is uh, a follow-up to an earlier podcast that we did. Invite folks to go back and listen to our earlier podcast on the Orrin and Orson West cases, their deaths. These poor young, these children, 3 and 4 years old, so sad, up in Bakersfield and California City, California. And it all starts back in September 2020, and it just wrapped up this month with the verdict, and the sentencing will be in July, a couple months from now. So they were charged, indicted with 7 counts, and they were actually only found guilty of 5 of them. How do you, since you were so involved in this, Kimmy, how do you feel about the verdict? What are your thoughts?
Well, I was shocked, that they had on two counts, hung jury, right?
Yep.
On two issues. Um, so I actually was surprised by that. But after thinking about it, being that I'm a trial and litigation paralegal for 30 years, um, it made sense. I understood it as to them having to evaluate based on evidence and testimonies. So I understood that.
Yeah, and if folks, if you go online and look at the stories that are out there, the media coverage of it, you'll see that uh, Trezell West and his wife Jacqueline West were only found guilty of the murder of Orrin. They were not found guilty of the murder of the
Orson West.
Orson, the 3-year-old, but they were found guilty of cruelty to children. So, relative to your involvement in this case, Kimmy, how does that line up with uh, them only being found guilty of the death of Orrin and not Orson?
Well, because of the fact of the testimony of the 12-year-old boy, biological son, who said that he saw him dead, right? Orrin.
Mm-hmm.
And so, whereas he did not state that I'm aware of, he did not state that he saw the same scenario with regards to Orson West.
Okay. Yeah, and to bring folks up to speed on this, at trial, the oldest son, the West had 6 kids under their control, and they had 2 biological children. They had 2 additional adoptive children, and then they had Orrin and Orson West, whom they had adopted, and 6 total. The oldest child was 10 years old at the time that all of this activity transpired. And at trial now, he's 12 years old, and they asked him about it, and he said that he had seen Orrin back in Bakersfield in September, uh, that it was quite common for him to be choking on his food at night and stuff like that. And he, in several of the articles you can find online, he talks about uh, waking up the next morning. They were all homeschooled, and he went back to the bedroom and he saw that Orrin was lying there. His skin looked chalky like it needed lotion. He had heard him gagging the night before, and he touched him and his body was cold. And in some of the news articles, it says that he even pointed this out to his parents that, hey, maybe we should call 911, and perhaps Orrin was deceased. And he was told to keep it quiet, keep it to himself, because otherwise Child Protective Services would come, the authorities would come and remove all of the children. And the young man, the 12-year-old, also stated that once they moved to California City, then that he had heard a noise in the bathroom, and the next day he never saw Orson again. So, according to this 12-year-old's testimony, Orrin died in Bakersfield and Orson died in California City at their new home. Bakersfield, they lived in an apartment complex in the city. And, we've been out there. We'll talk about
Both
this in a bit.
places,
Yeah.
yeah.
Out in California City, they lived on the absolute edge of town. And I mean, it was just flat land once you left their front yard. So, given this 12-year-old's testimony about the deaths occurring in two different cities, how does that relate to what God revealed to you and what you revealed to the police departments?
Okay, well, I just want to say that I don't ever go to trial on cases that I work. I get in and I get out. I do determine the missing person, what happened to them, just the information, where are they, and then I leave. I give the information, tip them off to to law enforcement, let them know the information because they have the means to go help the victim, right? Family does not, I do
Yeah.
not. So the best source is to tell the police. So I, report it to the lead investigators on the cases. So, so I was drawn into this case from a friend, Jim, who lived near California City, and he begged me to get involved in the case. So I went out to California City. Just I think it was maybe a week after, approximately, after the boys were reported missing. And at that time, I was sitting outside. The lead detective knew at California City, he knew that I was doing this and to ascertain information for them, to share the information. And so the Lord showed me that, the case would be resolved. They would find some evidence that would help them, with some kind of I don't have my notes in front of me, sorry. And then after that, I went home. So I worked it. I emailed them, gave them information that they would be resolved, the case, and arrest would be made. So I go home and I go to sleep, and it's very rare that the Lord gives prophetic dreams. He'd only give one prior on a missing person case. This is the second time. And I had gone to sleep that night after working the case in California City, and that was January 6, 2021, and that's by memory. I think it's January 5th, 2021. And so I'm trying to find my notes.
While you're looking for that, I'd like to point out that it wasn't until the 21st of December 2020 that Trezell reported the two young boys missing. And that's a whole nother story. If you can read for yourself or listen to our first podcast. So on the 21st, he reports them missing, and you're already out there on the 5th and the 6th working this. Not even a month later, just a couple weeks, like you said.
Yeah, then when my friend Jim called me. So, okay, so here it is, January 5th, 2021 at 11:06 a.m. So I'm writing the lead detective at California City and telling him that prophetically, here's what I'm getting. Number one, you will solve this case, so don't stop. Of course you wouldn't. God shows me you will have a conclusion. Number two, there will be some tangible evidence inside their house, incriminating evidence. Um, Something maybe concerning a pillow or a pillowcase, or something similar. An arrest will be made, and eventually you will find out about the whereabouts of the kids, alive or dead. And then I said I was going home. Now, as I'm just noting right here, very interesting, because when I go home, the Lord gives me that prophetic dream right that night. And for the first time, you know what I'm noticing? I say that something like on a pillowcase or similar. I'm detecting something to do with the bed, right?
Yeah.
I didn't notice that before.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm very busy, you guys, working case after case and do, and I didn't notice that. But anyway, so I go to bed, and I have a prophetic dream. I'm trying to find that email that I sent to the detective. Here it is. January 6, 2020. Excuse me, January 6, 2021 at 3:44 a.m. And I emailed the lead detective in California City. Rarely do I get prophetic dreams from God. I just had one and now woke. So I didn't even have time to think. I'm just literally emailing him. God showed me the two West boys in two separate beds alive. One was awake under the covers in a dark room, moving around under the covers. Then next scene, God showed me a few tall buildings together. Then those buildings disappeared one by one, and all I saw was an open, wide desert field, nothing around. Then the prophetic dream disappeared. Now, my interpretation, let me see. Yeah, the interpretation is the Bible says I need, let's see, I have a lot of screenshots in front of me of emails. Sorry, guys. Okay, so in the Bible, okay, number one is Orrin West, and I have it in emails, guys, where I tell the police the boy I saw under in the bed he kept trying to get out of bed, but he couldn't because the bed sheets were holding him down. And I'm sorry, it's disturbing still to talk about today. So this is what 2.5 years later, guys, and we just had the conclusion of the trial. And what the Lord showed me 2.5 years ago matches identically to what the 12-year-old biological son tells his testimony in trial. So we know that he's telling the truth. He doesn't know about me. I don't know about him. I don't go to court. I don't go to court. I don't go to the trials. Right? I just do my work prior, give the information to the police, and I move on. I got other cases to work, right? And so we know that 12-year-old little boy is telling the truth. So I see, let's go back to the prophetic dream, see Orrin West sleeping he's not asleep, he's awake, and he's trying to get out of bed, trying. And those sheets were holding him down. So I prayed, Lord, how do you interpret this? Well, the Bible says, you guys can go to the Bible, do some research, Google it. God refers to sleeping as dead. So now, what does it mean, guys, if we're forced to sleep? Those sheets were holding him down, forcing him to sleep and stay in bed, right? To sleep. So now, what does it mean to be forced to sleep? That means murder. So we knew back in January 2021 that Orrin West, because the Lord showed me Orrin West, was murdered in his bed.
Yep.
And the Lord showed me he suffocated. Now, what is it that you know about suffocation? What is the testimony that was told in court? That was also told from the 12-year-old, right? He had been, vomiting. And so it looks like he had aspirated possibly on this food. And so therefore he died by suffocation, just like I told the police.
Yeah.
Back a long time ago,
Yeah.
what, 2 years ago or so?
Reading from this news article, it says the 12-year-old boy woke up the next day and began his homeschooling. He came back to Orrin's bedroom and thought he saw the 4-year-old not breathing and white vomit, according to grand jury transcripts. Orrin's skin looked dry, like he needed lotion, the transcript stated. Now, for those who aren't familiar with my background, I'm a forensic victimologist and a professor of criminal justice studies at a state university. As a forensic victimologist, it is my job to take the deceased person, the evidence at the scene, and to speak for the victim in court, to present the victim, as it were, as evidence in court. And I also wrote a book with a retired New York detective on case studies in drowning forensics. And I personally am a drowning survivor. If you see white vomit or foam or something like that, usually with a drowning, it's pink foam. and that's the material getting down into the trachea, into the lungs, and being aerated, and then it comes back up. So when I read this testimony and I look at the court transcripts and that, the conclusion I can come to is that Orrin died from suffocation, and that fits with your testimony that you give
Well,
regarding your
you know,
prophetic
Dr.
word.
G, I feel that I also speak for the dead. I speak for them when they can't speak anymore. The Lord gives me info. I feel that I am trying to help the victims, and the best way really is to tell the police because they have the means to help them.
Mm-hmm.
So you and I go hand in hand. You work more in the tangible world, whereas I don't.
Yeah,
Mine are just pure gifts.
the physical and the metaphysical, as it were. Yeah, the
Well, not,
spiritual.
yeah, I mean, I'm a Christian ordained reverend. I did hospital ministry for over 20 years, ICU, ER, hospice, etc. These are gifts of for ministry. And this insight and revelation gift that I have and discerning um, so happens to work on missing person cases
Yeah,
to help the victims
and
is what I do.
and what you just told us about this, I mean, in my mind, dealing with hard facts and stuff like that in a court situation, uh, you stated that you saw buildings and you saw an open field, and having the first time you went up
Yeah,
there, I tracked
yeah.
you on 360. The second time I went with you, and Bakersfield, you're talking apartments, you're talking buildings, you're talking a city environment. But you get out to California City, and that's open spaces, folks. I mean, it is, as I stated in the previous one, it's a strange town. There's a city there, but it's so spread out. There's so much open space in the city. And then as soon as you get to where the West lived on the edge of town, it is just as far as you can see, just flat, and there's nothing. And
Yeah.
what I saw there, in conjunction with what this young man, the 12-year-old, said in court, that Orrin was deceased in Bakersfield and Orson passed away in California City,
Well, that's how the Lord
fits
showed me. Yeah.
perfectly, one for one,
Yeah,
with
that's what the Lord
what you
showed me,
said.
right? He showed me Orrin West in bed, struggling to
Yep,
get out, but
yep,
couldn't. Then the Lord showed me the next scene was the apartment building in Bakersfield. Then the next scene was a barren field, which I believe is California City. Now, all of that mirrors the testimony of the 12-year-old biological son. We know he's telling the truth, and of course, my prophetic gift comes from God. And that was 2.5 years ago. He doesn't know about me, the 12-year-old, and I didn't know about him. I never went to court. I stay away from it. It's too emotional. I'm a mom. I took care of people in hospitals, right? I'm a mama to everyone. I'm a caretaker. I can't do that. I can't go to court. I don't want to hear that. In fact, I already know the facts, right? God already told me. I don't I don't need to go to court. I'm helping other cases. My work was done on that case. But to hear the testimony about the 12-year-old biological son was overwhelming, and I cried for a long time and overwhelmed with that information and how it mirrors exactly what God showed me 2.5 years ago.
yep.
Oh, if anybody wants to see my original emails that I'm reading from now, they are pinned to my docuseries on my Facebook, found as Kymmi Bloomberg, Kymmi Bloomberg, Bloomberg. And it's a pinned docuseries. You go into comments, find the West case, click on the video, part one, and you look in the comments to that video. You're going to see all the emails. And so, yeah, so the other testimony that we heard during the trial that was shocking to me, because I didn't follow it online. These are things that I heard from online randomly.
Yep.
was the fact that you and I worked the case for the lead detective over at Bakersfield
Yeah.
Police Department, and we went out specifically to California City to help and to tell him through my gifts. Um, he wanted to know what I felt concerning the recovery, where the boys' bodies were. And we went out there August, what was the date? August 2022. And we determined,
Yeah.
after really going out there and getting a feel, and I had gone out to Bakersfield also, and the overall conclusion, what God showed me was that it's really hard to say, that the boys were placed in a dumpster. Orrin West was placed in a dumpster, and eventually made into the I'm sorry, I'm being emotional here. um, he's in a landfill today. And so
Yeah.
that testimony matches a neighbor. You want to read that, Dr. G?
Yeah. I'm gonna kind of read down through this article from the newspaper, online, of course. Let's see, 23 ABC News, um, out of Bakersfield, looks like. Um, uh, Maria Salas, this was her testimony in court, and they used a Spanish interpreter. She stated that back in September 2020, now to put this in perspective for you, in September 2020, the Wests, Trezell and Jacqueline and their 6 children, lived in the apartment complex Casa Loma on Lotus Lane in Bakersfield. And shortly after that, they moved to California City. So we're talking September, they're still there. And she said that in September 2020, she was visiting her daughter who lived in the same apartment building that the West did. Okay. The same set of apartments, Casa Loma. And while she was visiting, she heard a loud noise outside and, kind of surprised her. So she went to check and see what it was. And as she looked, she saw a couple walking away from a dumpster carrying an ice chest, and assumed that what she had heard was that, there was something in the ice chest that they had thrown away into the dumpster. Okay. And she testified that she called her friend who lived near the apartments and asked her, she was a little fearful and whatnot. And her friend just said, well, people throw stuff away. And they kind of blew it off that people are always near that dumpster. Um, that coincides with the testimony of the 12-year-old who was 10 at the time, that would have been the morning after uh, Orrin had choked to death in his sleep. And apparently, the assumption that is drawn there is that they had placed Orrin's body in the ice chest and carried him out to the dumpster to dispose of him. Uh, all I can say is, uh, having gone to a few parties at the beach and stuff when I was in the Army, what do you have in a cooler that can be so heavy that it requires 2 people to carry it? Typically, you're in the apartment complex, and if there is any ice and water in there, you carry it to the tub, one person, and you dump it in the tub and let it melt there. And if there's any beers in there or pop or whatever that haven't been drank, you take them out and put them in the fridge. You don't haul stuff out to the
You know what,
dumpster
Dr. G?
and throw it away.
You know what I'm thinking?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just about carrying something that's heavy. It's about 2 adult bodies being able to block any witnesses from seeing anything.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. True. But the point I want to stress here, as a forensic victimologist, and from your point, Rev Kymmi, is that both this testimony from Maria Salas and from your prophetic word and from the 12-year-old all point to the same thing, that Orrin was deceased in Bakersfield and that his parents, knowing full well his condition, did not report it to police, covered it up, and disposed of him in the most inhumane and disgraceful way that they possibly could, and carried him out to the garbage. And I don't think they got what they should have gotten.
We'll
But
find out with sentencing, huh?
we'll
Right around the
see.
corner.
We'll see. So
Um,
anyway, that
so what's interesting is,
what
like at
else?
the beginning of working this case and sharing the information with the police and tipping them with my prophetic information, it was very confusing at first. First to figure out the prophetic dream. But thank God, I was able to get the understanding that it meant, he it was murdered, right? Um, but I remember going to Bakersfield initially and feeling that one had died there. There's death there, right? Then going to California City, I also felt death was there. So that was very confusing for me to pick it up at two places. But then I had to contemplate, you have to weed things out and you need to figure it out. In the prophetic dream, God showed me the Bakersfield apartment building, then he shows me the field. So that's literally what happened. It was both places. And this was the order of things. Bakersfield apartment building, then Cal City, right? It was both places. That's why I got a hit with my gifts. As a cadaver dog gets hits, I get my hits. And I got hits in both towns.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it made sense later when the boy testified to this. I'm like, okay, I wasn't confused, right? Hearing his testimony in trial. That was accurate. That's why I got a hit on both towns.
yeah. And like like we said at the beginning, they were charged with 7 counts, uh, indicted for 7 counts, but they only found guilty of 5 of them. And now, if they can find additional evidence, then perhaps they can be found guilty later on of the last two of the murder of Orson as well, and conspiracy and getting rid of his body. But we'll see. The sentencing isn't until July, and at that point they could get uh, up to the maximum of life sentences, which in California, I looked it up, and the life sentence is 25 to 30 years. The prosecutor is weighing whether or not to try and pursue this any further. Um, Perhaps he will. We'll see. Um,
Well, I just want to say, I've been interviewed by TV reporters who've contacted me, and I've done interviews on this case. And one reporter was asking me, how did I feel about the verdict? I just want to say that, which I didn't share during that interview, but I'm going to share it on my own podcast. I just want to say that logically, let's use some logic for a second. We know what happened to Orson West, and he was the first in Bakersfield. Someone can say that's an accident, whatever. It got out of hand, didn't know what to do or whatever, but they didn't do anything about it or what have you. We could all hear excuses. However, now the second one's missing. Does anyone believe that that can be an accident as well? You know, rhetorical questions here.
yeah,
A coincidence that it's an accident, or do you think you're leaning more towards it's something intentional? We'll leave it at that. It'll be interesting to see if whether or not they end up trying those two counts later.
yeah. Well, I got, I have one additional question for you. As a Christian reverend, um, we're talking a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old little child here. What happens to their souls when they died? A lot of religions have different beliefs, and from your understanding and your experience, what is the fate of these innocent little children?
Though, of course, we believe we're Christians, okay? That's our faith, what we believe. Um, but when I became a new believer, I had a lot of things to deal with and to heal from. And one of those things was the fact that when I was about, I think I was 20 years old, I had been married and had a first pregnancy. And within my first trimester, I had a miscarriage. Now, I didn't know about miscarriages really. I was on, my life was just on what's the term? Cloud nine?
Cloud 9, yeah.
Yeah. And, I was telling everyone at the law firm. Interpreters would come in, I would tell them, court reporters would come in, I'm telling them, I'm pregnant. I'm pregnant. I'm pregnant. Everyone knew that I was pregnant. And sadly, I had a miscarriage at home alone. My husband was at work. I remember going into the doctor's afterwards and crying in his office for, not kidding, no exaggeration, probably an hour. So I was very traumatized. In fact, I had to get put on um, not antibiotics, antidepressants for a couple of months. I was so sad over the fact that my baby died. So I then, years later, becoming a Christian, I pursued the healing from that. And I went to a pastor and I asked, what happened to my baby? And he explained to me that, people who don't have, they're not of the age of accountability, babies, let's just say babies, they automatically go to heaven. So someday I'm going to see my baby again. And just as those who knew Orrin and Orson West will see them again later in heaven. They automatically are with Jesus, and I believe Jesus wanted justice. In fact, that's one of his names, if nobody knows that. His name is Justice, one of them. And Jesus obviously wasn't too pleased with the situation, enough to show me a prophetic dream that he knew I would be faithful and tell the police to help them to solve the missing person case. Of course, they had their own means. It's not just me with information, but no doubt, they knew of my information because I was in communication with them. Um, so it's really sad. This case is very sad. I try to stay away from cases involving children because I am a mom and I'm sensitive, you know. Dr.
Yeah.
G is hugging me right now, consoling me. So, anyway, it's going to be interesting for us all to listen to the sentencing, huh? That's July the 13th at 8:30 a.m. And I am definitely going to have that on my calendar.
Yeah, yeah. The just for those who are into the detail, the last two counts that they were charged with, um, you can't be subjected to double jeopardy. So if you're found guilty or not guilty, then you can't be tried again for the not guilty charges. But if the jury is hung as was the case here. Uh, Counts 1 through 3 were related to Orrin, and counts 4 through 6 were related to Orson. Count 7 was concerning both boys. And count 7 was the false report of an emergency to law enforcement, which they did in December 21st, 2020, and reporting the boys missing when in fact they had already been deceased. Anyway, the jury voted 8 votes guilty and 4 votes not guilty on count 4, and 10 votes guilty and 2 votes not guilty on count 5, which means they were hung on those 2 counts. And that would be related to second-degree murder and conspiracy relative to Orson's death, and for both Trezell and Jacqueline. So now that's where, as I was talking before, the prosecutor has the option, since those were the result of a hung jury, that when they go back in July now, he can bring this forward again and pursue bringing them back to trial for those 2 counts each. And so we'll see where they go on that. Very sad case. At least we've had, to some extent, some justice on this. The bodies of these poor children have not been found, and
yeah, I just don't think that they're able to get to them because of the location of where they're at, landfill.
yeah, yeah.
I just want to say, you know, it's such a sad case. Every case is sad. It just really is. But with children, it's just worse. It's really just hard to be involved on cases like this. But I just want to say that there's, like I said, other cases are terrible too. Like, for instance, we're going to be going this coming weekend, unless we need to move it for situations that may be a conflict to our schedule. We're supposed to go this weekend for recovery purposes, to find actor Julian Sands on Mount Baldy. Now, the probability of finding him is most likely, realistically, slim. But I believe in miracles. I've seen them so much. I'm going to name one for an example. Regan Hetzig case. Go listen to that episode. Miracle. Impossible. So I am walking, trusting God that He's in charge, not me. He will lead our steps. Hopefully, we will. It may take more than one. Maybe anybody else will find him, not just us. Anyone could find him, right? Out hiking. People need to keep their eyes open for, his clothes or shoes or backpack or what have you. And report it to the police if you guys see anything that you suspect to be Julian Sands, because his son does want him found.
Yeah.
He does want closure and a proper burial. So we're going to attempt to try to do that. There's no guarantees, but I do believe in miracles, and I do believe in Jesus and being able to do anything, as I've witnessed. We've all witnessed. Yeah, so what were you going to say, Dr. T?
Let's wrap it up there. Just so folks can find us, we do have an email address that you can reach us by, and that's RevKymmi, RevKymmi, period, or dot, Dr. G, DRG, at gmail.com. So RevKymmi dot Dr. G at gmail.com. And you also can find all of these cases that Kymmi has worked pinned in a docu-series. We did some short videos. interviews, and you can also find there the emails, the text
Yeah, the
messages, screen
original
captures
emails to
of
law
all the
enforcement.
original correspondence, the dated correspondence. You can see, like in this case, the evidence that she shared with law enforcement was in 2021,
So
January.
let me interject for a second. You could find those emails. It's a little tricky. You go into the comments, you find that specific case. Now you click on the video to that specific case. Now within that video, look in the comments. They're there, all the emails.
Yep, yep.
Yeah, if anybody wants a prophetic session with me or spiritual counseling, you can email me at the email that Dr. G mentioned, and we could go ahead and schedule it. I'll contact you.
And are you still doing the raffle free giveaway to?
Yeah, I'd like to do that once a month. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if anybody's interested in that, you can write me and just say in the subject line, free prophetic session, and then I'll know.
And if you'd like to listen and see what that's like, we do have episode 4 and episode 3 from season 2 up on our podcast. You can apologize for the sound quality on episode 4,
I
but
know that was so disappointing.
you can hear what we talk about. You can either, if it's up to you, you can participate. We can record it and use an alias to uh, can
Hide your
refer
identity.
to it. Yeah, or we can it can be completely confidential, offline, off script, no recording, nothing. Uh, but we would love to hear some examples there, testimonies to share with others so they can benefit from, because we all have, across the board, similar experiences and highs and lows and ups and downs. And it's just great
you
to
know, I,
share that with others to encourage them.
and I think that a lot of people, you guys have a heart like we do. You know, you care about people, but maybe you don't have the gifts to help. But you know what? When I work on cases and you know about it, write it down on a piece of paper and be praying every day that there be resolution on certain cases or for the missing person to be found. Prayer is so much, it's so much to offer to help. And I just got done working a case in Minnesota. Which one was that? Was it Madison?
Madeline
Oh, Madeline
Kingsbury.
Kingsbury. You can Google that. And I did work the case from afar. I don't need to go there. I go into praise and worship. I gain the information from God, the revelation of information. I emailed the sheriff there in charge of that case, tipped him off, and they do have that information. Hopefully, that someday soon they will have resolution.
Okay. Sure.
Yes. Thank you all so much for joining us. And
Yes.
we'll talk to you another episode. God bless.